So pivot lines are really helpful because you never want to be caught off guard in an interview, or most of the time you aren't going to run into a situation like this where someone's trying to catch you off guard, or I mean, hopefully they're not intentionally doing this, but you always want to be prepared for some wild card questions, or if there's anything that could be a red flag that has been an issue for you before. It's always helpful to have a pivot line to bring the interview back to the direction you want it to go. So let's say the interviewer brings up a controversial topic or some kind of real world event, and you're like, this is not what I want to talk about, or like, I feel like I need to be really careful with my words, so I don't want to speak into this. So you could respond with a pivot line like, that's a very important topic and one that I would feel more comfortable researching further before discussing, and then bring it right back to what you want to talk about and what you're there to talk about. Otherwise, if they ask you a personal question that you're not comfortable with, like if you don't want to get into the nitty gritty of your personal life or want to have a little more separation with that, you could say, that's a great question, but I'm here to talk about my book. In fact, I'd really like to talk about this. And that allows you to be in the driver's seat for the conversation. So feel free to use any of these and kind of play around with the wording on them so you can use them in different scenarios. And then this shouldn't happen, but I find I've been seeing this happen a lot lately, especially if anyone's on Book Talk and has seen the Book Talk drama going around. There have been a lot of people asking about another author's work or a controversy that's going on involving an author. And at the end of the day, like, I don't think we should be talking about other authors' work or like criticizing their works, unless you feel that it is an area of expertise. Like if you write about diversity or characters of color, or if you feel like you can be an expert on that topic or something like that, then I think it's all right to speak into. But the biggest thing to keep in mind is that whatever you say in this interview, you have to be comfortable seeing that on print. So I would hate for you to say something that, you regret later on, or that you don't want to be on the record saying. So the last pivot point we have here is, you could say at the end of the day, I can't speak for this author, so I don't feel comfortable answering this question. And then you could say, but I'd love to talk about this, and bring the conversation back to where you would like to, the topics you would like to discuss. So never feel bad about redirecting the conversation. As someone who did interviews, it's always helpful. You never know if you're asking a question that touches on a certain topic that they might not want to talk about, or if there are topics in your book that require like a trigger warning or something like that. It's helpful for the author to kind of steer the conversation back to a safe place if the interviewer isn't aware of that being, a controversial topic or like something that could become difficult. So any questions on pivot lines or any difficult questions that you could come across? Okay. All right. So now
I have one.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But it's like a first draft question. So if I stumble, that's why. So there are going to be some of us who might not even believe that we have anything of value to say and share. And so like, you might not even be able to see yourself in a position yet where you would be interviewed or want to be interviewed, or it's like, I'd like to keep all of myself in my books. Thank you. Like, we don't need to be doing this. And to that's an experience. And that's real and valid. And then there's like another side where it's like, you might be more than comfortable sharing the very vulnerable and the very like, this is my life, like, here you go. to that writer, are there any topics that you would say, like, just because you're comfortable sharing, would you, in your experience, be like, that's nice that you're comfortable, but you should have this kind of boundary, or like, this is what you should consider before you share something like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you so much for answering that. Asking that. I don't think there is a particular topic you have to shy away from as long as you feel comfortable talking about it. But I think you, when you're coming up with your talking points, it is important to think about those potential topics that are more vulnerable, or those points where you may be asked about something that's more vulnerable, and really analyze, like, am I the right person to be sharing about this? Should I be speaking out on this? Like, is it okay for me to be speaking out on this? I think as long as you answer those questions first, that is always helpful. If it's your own lived experience, I think it's okay to talk about that. It's more gauging like your comfort level, and if you are okay with the interviewer asking more questions about that. Because if you do want to talk about something more vulnerable, or like, I mean, I have posted on, like, hey, I have endometriosis. For some people, they might not want to talk about that in an interview, but for me, like, that has inspired what the project I'm working on right now. So if I drop that line in a conversation in the interview, of course the interviewer is going to say, like, oh, that's really interesting, like, tell me more about that, like, I don't know that much information about it, can you go into more details? So I would say as long as you feel comfortable talking about that, then go ahead and mention it. But really, like, have that conversation with yourself before, and ahead of time before mentioning it.
All right, thank you. And then Birgit says, I know that if I ever get asked a question and have to answer like that, it'll be very uncomfortable. Any way to mentally prepare for this emotional weight?
Yeah, I think that's where practicing can definitely come in handy. And I know practicing is very uncomfortable, but it does prepare you for these situations. And then you can tap into, how are you feeling talking about this? Are you tensing up? Are your shoulders coming up? Do you feel uncomfortable? Or are you at a loss of words for, like, how to talk about this subject? So definitely pay attention to those signs as well. But that's something to definitely practice for beforehand, and just kind of gauge your comfort level from there. Hopefully that
I
answers.
imagine that, like, if it's your very, very first podcast interview, it's your very first whatever, that almost to expect like a stumbling and a discomfort, kind of
For
like
sure.
getting a first
Yeah.
draft. And then later, by your 10th, 15th, you're like, let's not even listen to the first one.
Yeah.
we're just gonna keep leveling up at this point. All right,
Yeah. And it's totally fine to always be nervous. I mean, I would wake up every day, be the person, like, telling you good morning on the news, and, like, I still got nervous after doing it for, like, months or years. So it's totally okay if you are always still nervous, or if you're stumbling, even if it's the 15th interview. No one's expecting perfection, even on the other side. The person interviewing you, they're not expecting perfection. They're probably also nervous. I find that I get really nervous when I have to interview people. I've had to interview people for a couple, like, long form podcast episodes where it's like 20 minutes. And it is nerve wracking, just like making sure the conversation flows, and that I'm asking the right questions, and that I'm not asking something that's, like, off limits. So it goes both ways. Like, if you're nervous, just know the person interviewing you is also probably nervous as well. Let's see.
It sounds like maybe you answered this just now. If there's something in particular that you would not like to discuss, would you recommend communicating that to the interviewer ahead of time?
Yeah, I would definitely put that in an email ahead of time. once you are talking about the details, like how long it'll be, if it's going to be live or pre-recorded, just let them know, hey, like I'm okay talking about these topics, but I will not be answering questions about this topic. So feel free. Most of the time they should honor that. I don't think there's ever been a situation where someone hasn't. But it's always helpful for them to know ahead of time too. So when they're writing out their questions, they know to avoid a certain topic or not even ask questions around that